Welcome and warm greetings this evening. As night settles in, let's take a moment to breathe together and reflect on unfolding events quietly, yet with gentle curiosity. In today's calm roundup, we'll explore former President Trump's recent remarks about Iran. Consider the context of the broader Middle East tensions, examine layered evidence and multiple viewpoints, ponder hypothetical scenarios to soothe our thinking, and finally embrace a hopeful look ahead before drifting off to rest. This journey tonight is meant to lull the mind with informed clarity, not alarm, guiding you toward a balanced understanding as your thoughts unwind. This evening's anchor story centers on former President Trump's recent statement aboard Air Force One, where he denied reaching out to Iranian officials and issued a measured warning. "Don't touch our troops, well, come down so hard if they do anything to our people." In parallel, we'll connect this moment to the wider tapestry of hostilities in the Middle East, specifically the ongoing Israel-Iran exchanges and the evolving stance of the US. In upcoming moments, we'll gently unfold what the remarks signal, how they fit into recent historical developments, and how various nations perceive them. Our aim to create a quiet space for reflection, offering thoughtful insight without intensifying worry. So settle in, and let's begin with a soft curiosity about what's currently stirring world events, calmly steering our minds toward clarity and calm. As we begin our deeper dive, let's gently trace the events leading to former President Trump's firm but restrained remarks on Iran. The statement, which came while Trump was traveling with advisors, was prompted by speculation that he had engaged in behind-the-scenes diplomacy with Tehran. He was quick to dispel this, asserting he had made no direct outreach, while emphasizing a red line: any attack on American troops would trigger swift and decisive retaliation. The tone was stern, yet notably devoid of inflammatory language. To understand this moment more fully, we can take a calm step back. Tensions between the United States and Iran have long simmered, often shaped by complex regional alliances and flashpoints. In 2020, the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani by a US drone strike led to retaliatory rocket fire on American bases. Since then, US-Iran relations have remained fragile. Recent months have seen these tensions reignite, particularly with the escalation between Israel and Iran, including cyber attacks, missile exchanges, and diplomatic accusations exchanged at global summits. What makes Trump's statement notable is not just the message, it's the messenger. Although no longer President Trump remains an influential political figure, with his every word dissected both domestically and abroad, his warning to Iran, "Don't touch our troops," carries particular weight, especially in light of his previous decisions as Commander-in-Chief, such as withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal JCPOA in 2018. Iran, meanwhile, has not made public any plans to directly target US personnel. The country's leadership has been focused on its regional posturing, particularly in supporting militias in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. But American intelligence agencies have warned that escalations in the region could spill over into attacks on US interests, either directly or by proxy. It's this possibility that adds context to Trump's remarks. In the broader geopolitical theater, the G7 summit currently underway in Canada has provided a backdrop for diplomatic maneuvering. While the Biden administration is leading official US representation at the summit, the spectre of Trump's influence looms large. Foreign leaders aware of his potential return to power remain attentive to his positions. As we exhale gently and absorb these layered currents, we're reminded that global politics often plays out on many stages at once: visible press statements, quiet intelligence briefings, and symbolic gestures. Trump's denial of diplomatic outreach may close one door, but his open warning leaves another ajar, a message to both Iran and political observers worldwide. It is in these subtle tones of firmness without escalation that we find the pulse of tonight's unfolding moment. And as we prepare to move deeper into analysis, we carry forward this sense of measured observation, allowing both history and present context to guide our understanding. Now let's gently move into a more in-depth yet still peaceful analysis zone that seeks not to provoke but to clarify. At the heart of this unfolding situation is a trio of interrelated forces: the personal influence of Donald Trump, the geopolitical friction between the US and Iran, and the broader instability rippling across the Middle East. We begin with the former president himself. Donald Trump's influence on foreign policy is well documented. His administration's unilateral withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal was both controversial and consequential. That 2018 decision, grounded in claims that the agreement was too lenient and lacked enforcement mechanisms, led to Iran gradually breaching its own nuclear commitments. While the Biden administration has since sought to revive elements of the agreement, diplomatic progress has been sluggish and complicated by regional hostilities. In this context, Trump's recent warning to Iran, though unofficial, cannot be dismissed. It reflects a continuity in messaging: assertive, focused on deterrence, and responsive to any sign of threat toward American personnel. His use of language, "well, come down so hard," is consistent with a broader Trumpian strategy of projecting strength while avoiding open-ended entanglements. And for many who continue to see Trump as a likely 2024 Republican nominee, such remarks function not only as commentary, but as signals to both allies and adversaries. Iran, meanwhile, operates from a different vantage point. Internally, it faces political and economic pressures, sanctions, inflation, and a restive youth population demanding reform. Externally, it asserts itself through alliances with proxy groups such as Hezbollah, the Houthis, and various militias in Syria and Iraq. This strategy part, deterrence part, ideological outreach adds layers of unpredictability to any regional tension. Tehran's leaders may not seek direct confrontation with the US, but they often maneuver in ways that risk drawing others into the fray. That's what makes the current moment so delicate. The recent Israeli airstrikes on Iranian military infrastructure, the subsequent cyber responses, and regional destabilization, particularly in Syria and southern Lebanon, create a combustible environment. Though Trump's statement is primarily domestic in audience, its international implications are clear. It reassures supporters of American assertiveness while cautioning Iran to avoid escalation. There's also the question of perception. Internationally, Trump's return to the headlines with firm language might comfort some allies such as Israel and certain Gulf states who favor a hardline approach to Iran. Others, especially European leaders, still invested in preserving the JCPOA framework, may view his remarks with concern, fearing that they undermine fragile diplomatic efforts. And yet there is a quieter undercurrent to all this: the American military presence in the region, which continues despite shifting administrations. US troops remain in Iraq, Syria, and across bases in the Gulf, tasked with counter-terrorism, strategic deterrence, and regional stability. Their safety invoked directly by Trumpists, a priority that transcends party lines. His warning, therefore, while politically charged, resonates across broader security concerns shared by successive administrations. Amid these considerations, we must also remember that no missiles have been launched in response to Trump's statement. No new red lines have been crossed. The situation remains tense but not yet inflamed. This speaks to the restraint that persists quietly and consistently beneath the surface of geopolitical theatrics. As we pause here reflecting on history, present dynamics, and human motivations on all sides, we hold space for understanding that is neither rushed nor simplified. It is in this quiet discernment that meaningful insight often takes root. Now let us drift into a space of gentle speculation, not to provoke unease, but to offer a canvas for thought. What if these words, when used carefully, can encourage reflection without urgency, helping us understand where today's tensions might lead, and how calm foresight remains a powerful tool? What if Iran had indeed received an informal message from a Trump-aligned channel, whether a private intermediary, a third-party diplomat, or a public remark intended as indirect communication? Even without official contact, messages in international relations can travel through whispers and headlines. In such a case, Iran might interpret the message less as a backdoor negotiation and more as a signal of what a future Trump administration might look like: tougher sanctions, fewer concessions, and a narrower diplomatic path. That perception alone could shape Tehran's short-term strategy, perhaps inclining them to avoid escalation for now. But what if an attack on US personnel or assets did occur, even accidentally? The consequences could ripple beyond military retaliation. A renewed spiral of conflict could disrupt global energy markets, unsettle regional economies, and once again divide international consensus on how to respond. Trump's words in that case would not merely echo, they would ignite debate across NATO, the UN, and among domestic policymakers about proportionality, legality, and long-term vision. Now let's gently flip the lens. What if Trump's warning had a calming effect? In geopolitics, deterrence can work not just through visible build-up, but through credible threat communicated clearly. Iran's calculus includes not only military response, but also global perception. Knowing that a former president and possible future one would react harshly might encourage restraint among those seeking to avoid wider war. And finally, what if diplomacy, quiet, patient, behind-the-scenes diplomacy, did take root instead? Though not Trump's current approach, it is not impossible that channels of dialogue might reopen under a shifting international framework. Regional actors such as Oman or Qatar have previously served as mediators between the US and Iran. Perhaps amidst all the noise, there's still space for soft voices to rise and redirect. These what-ifs don't predict the future. They simply offer perspectives, pathways that are open, contingent, and dependent on human choices. And in contemplating them, we allow ourselves to remain aware, not alarmed. Hope, as always, lives in how we interpret the possible. As we arrive at the end of our evening journey, let us turn our gaze gently forward. The world, even in moments of rising tension, remains full of potential for restoration. The words exchanged between nations, whether stern or conciliatory, always carry with them the power to steer events toward unexpected clarity. Former President Trump's recent statement, firm in tone, yet measured in scope, serves as a reminder of how influence extends beyond official office. His voice, still echoing through global headlines, intersects with a fragile yet enduring architecture of international relations. At the same time, Tehran's silence in response to his remarks may reflect a strategic pause space between words where possibility still resides. Tonight, our reflection has traced not only a moment of diplomatic tension, but also a broader truth that even in uncertain times, restraint often prevails. Despite the many variables, the Middle East has long functioned as a place of paradox, of deep roots, and surprising shifts. And in this current chapter, we are reminded that global leaders past and present shape the tone of tomorrow through both action and absence. If we have learned anything from today's developments, it is that peace often lingers just beyond the spotlight. It may not always shout, but it endures in quiet decisions, in paused hands, and in words not yet spoken. The restraint shown on all sides, so Faris, a quiet victory, even if it's not celebrated on breaking news banners. And so we close our eyes tonight with cautious optimism. The world has not unraveled. It turns still bound by shared stakes and silent agreements. We do not know what tomorrow brings, but we rest tonight knowing that understanding, reflection, and watchful hope remain our best companions. Thank you for joining me on this thoughtful journey. May your night be peaceful and your dreams clear and calm. Let knowledge gently guide your rest, and let tomorrow arrive with steadiness and perspective. Link 3 ECAs, MSNBC.com, Opinion, MSNBC Opinion, Trump Deportations, Chicago, New York, Project 47, RCNA 213240. Good evening! As twilight settles across the horizon and lights begin to glow in quiet neighborhoods, we invite you to join us for a moment of calm reflection. This is not the rush of breaking news, nor the clang of headlines meant to startle. Instead, it is a slow turning of the page, a thoughtful conversation between you and the unfolding world. Tonight's journey begins with a familiar figure whose presence continues to cast a long shadow over American political discourse, former President Donald J. Trump. While no longer in office, his influence remains deeply woven into the fabric of current events, policy debates, and international negotiations. Whether one views his legacy with admiration or concern, his voice still echoes, most recently in matters touching diplomacy, governance, and the fine threads of peace between adversaries. We open with a subject that quietly rose amid louder stories, reports of Mr. Trump offering to mediate tensions between Israel and Iran, two nations locked in decades of distrust, ideological rivalry, and military caution. Though not an official envoy, Trump's gesture, framed by his allies as an attempt at informal diplomacy, has sparked curiosity. Why now? Is there any merit to the idea? And what does it reveal about the evolving relationship between unofficial influence and global diplomacy? These are not easy questions, but we will not rush toward answers. Instead, let's trace the arc of this moment with care, observing not just the surface of news, but the deeper context beneath it. As we journey into the story, we'll explore both historical memories and present-day motivations. We'll examine the nature of power outside official office, the role of symbolism in peace efforts, and how media narratives shape perception even before actions take root. Our purpose tonight is not to draw conclusions hastily. Rather, it is to guide the reader into a state of considered awareness. In a world brimming with noise and urgency, we offer space for stillness and thought. And perhaps in this slower rhythm, we can uncover meaning often missed in the clamour. As we turn the page to part 2, we will begin to walk more closely alongside this narrative. We'll revisit key events that set the backdrop. Listen for the subtleties in Trump's intentions and quietly ask, what does this all mean, not just politically, but emotionally and historically, for the world we share? As we settle into this exploration, let us gently look back, not out of nostalgia, but for clarity. The tensions between Israel and Iran did not arise suddenly. They are the echoes of history, ideology, geopolitics, and at times deep-seated fear. For decades, these two nations have stood on opposite ends of a vast regional divide shaped by conflicting interests, religious identity, and strategic power. Iran, a Shiite-majority Islamic republic, has long projected itself as a regional counterweight to Western-aligned powers. Israel, with deep military capabilities and a complex relationship with the Arab and Persian world, has positioned itself defensively, especially in response to Iran's nuclear ambitions and support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Repeated rounds of missile strikes, cyber attacks, and verbal escalation have become a grim rhythm in their relations. Now imagine this landscape, and then picture Donald Trump entering the scene again, not as president, but as a former head of state, wielding informal authority and international visibility. Reports suggest that Trump, through intermediaries or direct offers, expressed willingness to facilitate dialogue between Israel and Iran. There are no official confirmations from Tehran or Jerusalem acknowledging serious engagement, and many diplomats see the gesture as symbolic. Yet symbolism itself in the realm of diplomacy can be powerful. This offer echoes Trump's past attempts at unconventional diplomacy. In office, he famously met with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, defying decades of diplomatic protocol. He withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, an action hailed by some as decisive and criticized by others as destabilizing. His moves often broke with traditional norms, yet they sometimes altered the tone of dialogue in unpredictable ways. So, what motivates Trump now? For some analysts, this might be a strategic re-entry into the global conversation ahead of the 2024 campaign cycle. For others, it might be an attempt to burnish a legacy that includes both economic turbulence and diplomatic drama. Supporters argue that Trump sees himself as a deal-maker with unique leverage over both American conservatives and international players. Detractors suggest it may be less about peace and more about personal optics. Regardless of intent, the gesture raises quiet questions. Is the world open to unofficial diplomacy in a time of fragmented alliances and rising populism? Does the symbolic presence of a former president hold any practical value? Or does it complicate already delicate balances? The current administration under President Joe Biden has not commented directly on Trump's gesture. However, it continues to work through multilateral channels to monitor regional tensions, prevent nuclear escalation, and encourage stability. The U.S. State Department remains cautious in its wording, often reaffirming its commitment to the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA) framework, though progress toward its revival remains stalled. Meanwhile, Israel has remained publicly silent, likely calculating the optics of acknowledging or dismissing Trump's involvement. Iran, on the other hand, continues to send mixed signals, ranging from hardline rhetoric to brief cryptic comments from spokespersons hinting at openness to indirect communication. Yet in truth, no nation has officially embraced the proposal. Perhaps the gesture was never meant to be embraced in a formal sense, but rather observed, interpreted, and debated. And here, as we close this chapter of Part 2, we can reflect on what has emerged so far. In a time where power does not always come from office, where gestures speak louder than agreements, and where diplomacy lives as much in shadow as in sunlight, we are reminded that the theatre of global relations is as much about tone and presence as it is about policy. Next, in Part 3, we will move into deeper waters. We'll gently examine the potential impact of Trump's gesture, explore the broader geopolitical implications, and ask, even if no formal peace emerges, can the act of proposing dialogue create unexpected ripples in the world's political psyche? In our quiet pursuit of understanding, we now turn our gaze to the deeper implications of what it means when an informal figure steps into formal terrain, especially a figure like Donald Trump. His gesture toward mediating peace between Israel and Iran may appear at first glance to be more performance than policy. But in global politics, performance itself can carry weight. To understand this, we must begin with the concept of shadow diplomacia, term used to describe unofficial actors influencing or attempting to influence foreign affairs. Former leaders often engage in it. Jimmy Carter, through the Carter Center, helped monitor elections and supported peace efforts across Africa and Latin America. Barack Obama has spoken out about democracy and climate change. But Trump's approach is different. Rather than working through NGOs or established channels, his efforts are often direct, highly visible, and designed to challenge the norms of traditional diplomacy. Let us consider several dimensions of the impact of this gesture. First, the psychological impact on allies and adversaries alike. Trump's re-entry into high-profile discussions reminds both Israel and Iran that he remains a variable on the world stage. For Iran, it's a reminder of the leader who reimposed crushing sanctions and left the nuclear deal. For Israel, it's a signal of potential future alignment, recalling Trump's strong pro-Israel policies, such as moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. Even if no government formally responds to his peace proposal, the gesture alone may recalibrate strategic calculations. What if he returns becomes a legitimate consideration? Second, the domestic political resonance within the United States. In a deeply polarized electorate, Trump's every move is both a political message and a media event. His offer to mediate, especially if presented as a contrast to the Biden administration's more measured tone, becomes a rhetorical tool painting himself as a proactive, deal-oriented figure. This creates political momentum regardless of outcome. His base may see this as strength and global leadership. Critics, meanwhile, may warn of destabilization or oversimplification of complex issues. The truth likely lies in a space between. Third, we must ask, could any positive potential emerge? It is not impossible. In history, unexpected figures have catalyzed breakthroughs precisely because they were outsiders. Consider Pope John Paul II's influence on the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, or Bill Clinton's attempts at fostering dialogue in the Israel-Palestine conflict post-presidency. Even when success is incomplete, the effort often creates new space for discourse. A proposal that is not adopted can still shift tone or soften hard rhetoric, at least momentarily. Some moderate analysts suggest that Trump's overture, if followed by more structured back-channel discussions, could paradoxically give cover for others to pursue cautious engagement. By drawing attention to the idea of peace, even if clumsily, he forces the issue onto the table in a year dominated by elections, conflict, and fear. However, there are concerns. Unofficial gestures can undercut official efforts. If perceived as freelancing, they may embolden hardliners or cause diplomatic confusion. Iran's internal factions, for example, include reformists who might be open to renewed dialogue, but also hawks who view Trump as an aggressor unworthy of negotiation. Similarly, Israel's leadership faces a delicate internal balance and must consider both national security and coalition politics. The mere appearance of legitimizing a Trump-led initiative could carry domestic political risks. And so we are left with a kind of paradox. The offer may not be actionable, yet it is not meaningless. It hovers in the background, neither ignored nor embraced, but observed. Much like the former president himself, the idea floats between relevance and irrelevance, between possibility and provocation. What this reveals is a deeper truth about the modern world. Power is increasingly fragmented. No longer contained within institutions alone, influence moves fluidly through media, through persona, through gestures that spark debate more than they settle it. As we prepare for the next part of our exploration, we invite a shift in perspective. Let us for a moment step away from the headlines and walk into the realm of imagination. What might happen if we entertain alternative futures not as predictions, but as gentle thought experiments that illuminate both our hopes and our caution? In our quiet pursuit of understanding, we now turn our gaze to the deeper implications of what it means when an informal figure steps into formal terrain, especially a figure like Donald Trump. His gesture toward mediating peace between Israel and Iran may appear at first glance to be more performance than policy. But in global politics, performance itself can carry weight. To understand this, we must begin with the concept of shadow diplomacy, a term used to describe unofficial actors influencing or attempting to influence foreign affairs. Former leaders often engage in it. Jimmy Carter, through the Carter Center, helped monitor elections and supported peace efforts across Africa and Latin America. Barack Obama has spoken out about democracy and climate change. But Trump's approach is different. Rather than working through NGOs or established channels, his efforts are often direct, highly visible, and designed to challenge the norms of traditional diplomacy. Let us consider several dimensions of the impact of this gesture. First, the psychological impact on allies and adversaries alike. Trump's re-entry into high-profile discussions reminds both Israel and Iran that he remains a variable on the world stage. For Iran, it's a reminder of the leader who reimposed crushing sanctions and left the nuclear deal. For Israel, it's a signal of potential future alignment, recalling Trump's strong pro-Israel policies, such as moving the US embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. Even if no government formally responds to his peace proposal, the gesture alone may recalibrate strategic calculations. What if he returns becomes a legitimate consideration. Second, the domestic political resonance within the United States. In a deeply polarized electorate, Trump's every move is both a political message and a media event. His offer to mediate, especially if presented as a contrast to the Biden administration's more measured tone, becomes a rhetorical tool, painting himself as a proactive, deal-oriented figure. This creates political momentum regardless of outcome. His base may see this as strength and global leadership. Critics, meanwhile, may warn of destabilization or oversimplification of complex issues. The truth likely lies in a space between. Third, we must ask, could any positive potential emerge? It is not impossible. In history, unexpected figures have catalyzed breakthroughs precisely because they were outsiders. Consider Pope John Paul II's influence on the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, or Bill Clinton's attempts at fostering dialogue in the Israel-Palestine conflict post-presidency. Even when success is incomplete, the effort often creates new space for discourse. A proposal that is not adopted can still shift tone or soften hard rhetoric, at least momentarily. Some moderate analysts suggest that Trump's overture, if followed by more structured back-channel discussions, could paradoxically give cover for others to pursue cautious engagement. By drawing attention to the idea of peace, even if clumsily, he forces the issue onto the table in a year dominated by elections, conflict, and fear. However, there are concerns. Unofficial gestures can undercut official efforts. If perceived as freelancing, they may embolden hardliners or cause diplomatic confusion. Iran's internal factions, for example, include reformists who might be open to renewed dialogue, but also hawks who view Trump as an aggressor, unworthy of negotiation. Similarly, Israel's leadership faces a delicate internal balance and must consider both national security and coalition politics. The mere appearance of legitimizing a Trump-led initiative could carry domestic political risks. And so we are left with a kind of paradox. The offer may not be actionable yet. It is not meaningless. It hovers in the background, neither ignored nor embraced, but observed. Much like the former president himself, the idea floats between relevance and irrelevance, between possibility and provocation. What this reveals is a deeper truth about the modern world. Power is increasingly fragmented. No longer contained within institutions alone, influence moves fluidly, through media, through persona, through gestures that spark debate more than they settle it. As we prepare for the next part of our exploration, we invite a shift in perspective. Let us for a moment step away from the headlines and walk into the realm of imagination. What might happen if we entertain alternative futures, not as predictions but as gentle thought experiments that illuminate both our hopes and our caution? Let us now imagine, softly without urgency, how the future could unfold, shaped not by declarations but by possibilities quietly taking form behind the scenes. We do not pretend to know what will come, but there is value in asking, what if not to stir anxiety, but to illuminate choices? What if Trump's gesture opens a back channel of dialogue? Suppose intermediaries, perhaps former diplomats, business leaders, or regional figures, begin informal communications spurred by the notion that Trump's involvement makes headlines and creates political cover. Not official peace talks, but a loosening of the gridlock, allowing Iran and Israel to explore confidence-building measures without the weight of formal expectations. Even a small gesture, such as a symbolic agreement on humanitarian aid, medical collaboration, or religious heritage protection, could signal that diplomacy does not always require a treaty to begin. These first steps are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, cautious, and often invisible. But if such steps occurred under the shadow of an informal proposal, would that not still be movement? What if Trump's move inspires the current administration to re-engage more assertively, feeling pressure to distinguish its own foreign policy from Trump's improvisational style? The Biden administration might double down on structured diplomatic efforts. This could take the form of re-energizing European partners to pressure Iran on nuclear transparency, or of discreetly encouraging regional partners like Jordan, Oman, or the UAE to facilitate communication. This is how parallel diplomacy works in modern times. One figure speaks to the press, while others move silently through channels that history will later reveal. What if none of it results in peace, but instead shapes public discourse? Even without formal outcomes, Trump's peace proposal may influence how Americans view Middle Eastern affairs. It may nudge certain voter blocs toward prioritizing foreign policy. It may reframe how leaders speak of Iran not just as an adversary, but as a complex player in a fragile region. And it may revive debates about America's global role as peacekeeper, as negotiator, or as protector of national interest. There is also a darker path, though. We will only glimpse it gently. What if Trump's offer backfires, if it hardens positions, breeds mistrust, or distracts from delicate talks already underway? Uncoordinated gestures can sometimes confuse allies, embolden enemies, or be used by propagandists to paint diplomacy as disorganized. This is a risk not only with Trump, but with any figure whose influence outruns formal authority. But even then, history tells us that not all missteps are final. The arc of diplomacy is rarely linear. It moves in fits and starts, guided as much by intent as by timing. And so we sit with these imagined futures, not to forecast them, but to reflect on what each possibility teaches us. In a world of sharp choices, gentle reflection offers balance. In a climate of headlines and counter-headlines, thinking slowly becomes a form of wisdom. As we approach the final part of our evening journey, let us gather what we have observed not as conclusion, but as continuity. We end not with certainty, but with openness. A quiet belief that even amidst division gesture, however imperfect, still carry the seed of transformation. And now, as the night deepens and the day's noise begins to fade, we arrive at the final stretch of our shared reflection. What have we truly seen? Not a breaking headline, not a peace treaty signed beneath a cascade of confetti. Instead, we have witnessed the quiet presence of a gesture, one that stirred thought, sparked questions, and invited the world to reflect once again on the nature of leadership, legacy, and diplomacy. Donald Trump's offer to mediate between Israel and Iran may not reshape history. It may not lead to handshakes across borders or redrafted accords. But the gesture itself reminds us of a profound human truth, that attempts at peace, even when clumsy or controversial, are still a form of longing for relevance, for redemption, for resolution. And what of us, those watching, reading, contemplating at the edges of the world stage? We are participants too in how these stories unfold. Our attention, our discourse, our ability to listen without reacting. These are acts of quiet participation in a global dialogue that never truly sleeps. There are no easy answers tonight, only careful observations rooted in reality and softened by understanding. We have traced the arc of Trump's influence, examined its weight and its limits, and gently asked what might emerge when someone outside the system steps forward with an offer, however complex in intent. But perhaps the most valuable thing we've uncovered is this, that diplomacy, like healing, often begins not with bold solutions, but with small, imperfect openings. A word spoken, a channel opened, a possibility imagined. And so, as we close this evening's story, let us hold space for a future not yet written, one in which official leaders, informal voices, and everyday citizens might all contribute, slowly, carefully, meaningfully, to a more thoughtful world. Thank you for joining this quiet journey. May your night be restful, your thoughts gentle, and your hope undimmed. Until tomorrow, we remain committed to bringing you not just the news, but the space to understand it. Link 1 https www.nbcnews.com News Latino Trump backtracks ICE arrests farmers, hotel workers, RCNA 213469. Good evening. As night falls and the world slows its pace, let's take this moment not to stir unease, but to reflect together calmly, curiously, on a subtle yet powerful shift within America's ongoing immigration story. Tonight, we turn our attention to a policy move that quietly echoes across farms, hotels, and kitchens. It's a decision that began as a pause, pivoted into pursuit, and now leaves behind a wake of uncertainty and debate. Just days ago, former President Donald Trump reportedly halted a planned wave of ICE workplace raids targeting industries like agriculture and hospitality sectors, where undocumented labor is known to be both common and quietly vital. It was a surprising pause, a signalsome thought of strategic restraint or electoral recalibration. But it didn't last. That brief stillness gave way to reversal. New instructions have reactivated the enforcement push, bringing the threat of immigration raids back to farms and hotel kitchens across the country. What changed? And what does this back and forth tell us about the current state of immigration enforcement, political signaling, and the silent tension between security and labor? These questions are not meant to provoke, but to gently unfold in our minds as we explore the layers of this development. Tonight's bulletin will be delivered in 5 softly woven parts. We begin here, easing in. Then we'll guide you through the latest news with clarity and care. After that, we'll open up a broader discussion. Why did this happen? Who stands to gain? And who might feel the impact most? Later, well, imagine what the future could look like if enforcement sharpens, if it relaxes, or if it reforms. And finally, well close with a note of continuity and hope, a small reassurance that every policy is part of a longer story we all share. This is not just a story about immigration enforcement, it's about how a country defines its labor, its laws, and its humanity in the spaces in between. And so, as we prepare to go deeper, we'll carry with us a sense of balance between caution and understanding, between truth and tenderness. In the quiet corridors of power, decisions often change direction, not with fanfare, but with a memo. That's exactly what happened in mid-June, when a leaked internal directive from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) showed that workplace raids previously paused were once again being authorized under Donald Trump's direction. These raids, aimed at identifying and removing undocumented immigrants working in farms, hotels, and food processing centers, had been momentarily shelved just days earlier, seemingly in recognition of their disruptive potential. Now they're back. To understand this pivot, we must first step back and look at the broader context. Trump's second-term immigration agenda has been unmistakably focused on deterrence, rapid deportation, and elevating immigration enforcement to a central pillar of domestic policy. Yet, the June pause suggested internal deliberation. ICE Acting Director Tatum King reportedly instructed field offices to hold back from new operations unless national security or serious criminal threats were involved. The rationale: avoid widespread labor disruptions and the media fallout that often accompanies high-profile raids. The industries involved, agriculture, hospitality, and meat processing, are not only vital to the U.S. economy, but also politically sensitive. These sectors depend heavily on undocumented labor, something few employers publicly acknowledge but most understand. Raids risk workforce collapse in already strained environments, raising prices, cutting output, and exposing employers to legal scrutiny. The calculus is complex: enforcing immigration law while avoiding economic self-sabotage. But this complexity is not new. Under past administrations, both Republican and Democrat, has struggled to balance enforcement goals with economic realities. What makes this moment different is the backtracking itself. Trump, rarely known for second-guessing enforcement orders, made a quiet shift, only to reverse it reportedly under pressure from hardline aides who argue that workplace enforcement sends the clearest deterrent message. Among those voices is Stephen Miller, a longtime architect of Trump's immigration policies. According to reporting from NBC and corroborated by multiple sources, Miller strongly pushed for the raids to resume. His influence remains potent, even in a landscape where business interests and rural Republican donors often plead for moderation. This tug-of-war is emblematic of a broader divide, not between parties, but within conservative circles themselves, between ideology and economics. Farmers, especially in Trump-leaning states like Iowa and Nebraska, have voiced concern. In interviews, some have expressed quiet frustration, noting that labor shortages are already squeezing margins. Hotel owners in southern states echo the sentiment. One Georgia-based operator who spoke on Background described the return of raids as a grenade thrown into an already fragile workforce. Despite the mounting concern, public statements from Trump's team have remained minimal, leaving room for interpretation. Is this a calculated political gesture designed to reassert law and order credentials without triggering mass panic? Or is it a sign of deeper fractures in the strategy, a reflexive shift in response to internal pressure? In either case, the practical implications are clear. Workers who had briefly exhaled in the wake of the pause are once again on alert. Employers are reviewing their records. Advocacy groups are mobilizing to provide legal guidance. And in places where crops need picking and rooms need cleaning, the silent stress has returned. As we transition into the next part of our analysis, remember this: policy decisions don't occur in a vacuum. They ripple outward, into fields, into homes, into the rhythms of daily life. And tonight, that ripple feels sharper because of the whiplash that preceded it. When an administration reverses course so abruptly, it invites a deeper look not only into the action itself, but into the forces behind it. Tonight, let's examine why this happened, what it means, and how different communities, rural farmers, hotel operators, undocumented workers, and even political strategists are experiencing its impact in real time. To begin, it's important to understand that workplace immigration raids are not new. They've long been a tool used by ICE to enforce compliance with federal immigration laws. But these operations are also politically charged and logistically complex. They often result in dozens, sometimes hundreds of arrests, but rarely do they target employers directly. The laborers, not the businesses, face the harshest consequences. During Trump's first term, ICE conducted a series of high-profile raids, most notably in Mississippi in 2019, where nearly 700 workers were detained at poultry plants. The spectacle of such enforcement drew sharp lines. Some praised the commitment to law enforcement, while others questioned its humanity and economic logic. Fast forward to 2025, and we're witnessing a similar storyline. Only now, with the added backdrop of inflationary pressures, workforce shortages, and a more fragmented political landscape. One reason the recent pause was so notable is because it suggested a brief moment of alignment between political pragmatism and economic realism. For a president known for tough-on immigration rhetoric, the restraint signaled sensitivity to a base that is no longer monolithic. Rural business owners, many of whom supported Trump at the polls, now find themselves caught between loyalty to policy and the operational needs of their farms and facilities. This is not to say the return of enforcement was unexpected. Within Trump's camp, there are factions who view leniency, even strategic, as weakness. The push from hardliners like Stephen Miller is rooted in a belief that immigration deterrence must be visible and uncompromising. Raids, even if disruptive, serve as a performance of control. And in an election year, climate optics matter sometimes more than outcomes. But who pays the price for these performances? For undocumented workers, many of whom have lived in the US for years, raised children, paid taxes, and built communities, the return of raids means more than job loss. It means fear. It means legal uncertainty. It means the sudden possibility of separation from family. A single ICE operation can ripple through entire towns, chilling attendance at schools, places of worship, and medical appointments. Employers too face risks. Though often not prosecuted directly, they experience operational chaos. Lost shifts, stalled harvests, and scrutiny from regulators and the media. In industries like agriculture and hospitality, where turnover is high and profit margins slim, these raids can be economically destabilizing. A grower in California's Central Valley may not have the luxury of waiting for a new documented workforce to appear. Crops don't pause for politics. And then there's the legal tangle. Federal law prohibits hiring unauthorized workers, yet enforcement is uneven. E-Verify remains voluntary in most states. This creates a shadow economy where employers rely on labor they cannot publicly acknowledge. ICE raids bring that shadow into daylight, and in doing so, force a reckoning between legality and necessity. Yet despite all this, many Americans remain divided. Some see the return of raids as a return to order reaffirming national sovereignty and the rule of law. Others view it as misdirected punishment, targeting the vulnerable rather than reforming a broken system. And then there are those in the middle, torn between empathy and enforcement, unsure which path honors both security and decency. One must ask, is this policy about immigration or about politics? Is it about protecting jobs or protecting narratives? These are not easy questions, but in asking them, we grow more capable of understanding the forces shaping our communities. As we move into our next section, we'll look forward not with fear, but with curiosity. What could the near future hold if these trends continue? What if the raids expand? What if they stop again? What if we chose a new direction altogether? Before we imagine those roads ahead, let's pause with this thought. Every policy has a heartbeat, and behind that heartbeat are real people, working, raising families, and wondering if they will still be here tomorrow. Let's gently step into the realm of what if, not to stoke fear, but to soften the sharpness of policy with reflection. Hypothetical thinking allows us to see past today's headlines and consider how different paths might shape tomorrow's realities. Tonight, as we rest our thoughts on the story of workplace immigration raids, we invite you to explore the roads not yet taken. What if the enforcement continues and expands weekly raids across the Midwest, coordinated operations in hotel chains, checkpoints near construction sites? In such a future, many undocumented workers might retreat further into the shadows. Employers would likely face disruptions and increased costs, passing those costs on to consumers. Fields could remain unharvested. Hotels might cut services. Over time, the human and economic cost might push moderate voices on both sides of the political aisle to demand a more comprehensive immigration policy, one that balances enforcement with legalization pathways. And what if instead enforcement eases again, if workplace raids are quietly deprioritized and IC focuses on threats to national security and violent crime the public may barely notice? Employers might breathe easier, and undocumented communities may feel just safe enough to keep contributing, paying taxes, educating their children, supporting industries most Americans depend on. Yet critics might say that such a path invites more unauthorized immigration, creating political pressure for a harder stance down the road. Now imagine a middle path. What if the next administration, perhaps even the current one, initiated a worker visa reform program coupled with technology-enhanced verification? What if undocumented workers already in the US were allowed to apply for legal status if employed in critical industries and free of criminal records? It wouldn't solve everything, but it could change the climate from fear to structure, from punishment to participation. In that world, ICE would still exist, but its role might narrow. Enforcement would focus less on those picking strawberries and cleaning rooms and more on disrupting trafficking networks or fraud schemes. Families would be less afraid of midnight knocks. Business owners wouldn't have to choose between compliance and survival, and the nation's conscience might settle more gently at night. Of course, these are imagined futures. The real world resists neat endings. But tonight, let us entertain these possibilities not as fantasies but as mirrors, each one revealing something about what we value, what we tolerate, and what we hope to preserve. As we prepare for our final part, carry these thoughts with you. Policies are choices. Choices create stories. And the best stories, those we remember, are the ones where humanity, not just legality, leads the way. Now, as our evening journey draws to a close, let's return not to where we started, but to a gentler place shaped by deeper understanding. We began with a policy reversal, a pause in workplace immigration raids that quickly became a green light for renewed enforcement. We traced the motivations, the ripple effects, and the silent burdens carried by workers, business owners, and communities alike. But beneath the headlines and political calculations, we found something else, something quieter, more enduring. A question. How does a nation decide who belongs, who contributes, and who must live in fear? The answer isn't fixed. It shifts with each administration, each election, each moment of crisis or clarity. And yet through it all there remains a shared truth. This country, like many others, is built not just by policies but by people, by hands that plant, cook, clean, lift and build, by those who dream of better lives, even if they came here without permission, often because no other path was available. Tonight, perhaps we don't need new laws to feel something shift. Maybe all that's needed is a pause this time, not from enforcement, but from judgment. A moment to imagine a future where dignity is not something earned after years of invisibility, but something offered from the start. The story of immigration in America has always been one of contradiction, borders and bridges, fear and welcome, exclusion and inclusion. What makes this moment different is not the tactics being used, but the choice we all have in how to respond with anger, indifference, or empathy. And so, as you prepare to rest, may you carry with you not only knowledge, but a sense of quiet power, the power of perspective, the power to ask, how can we build systems that uphold the law and still honor the lives within them? How can we be a country that is both strong and kind? Tomorrow the headlines will continue. Policies may shift again. But tonight you've taken a few moments to understand what lies beneath the surface, not just politics, but people. Not just strategy, but story. Sleep well. The world is complex, but your ability to care softly, thoughtfully is what helps shape it for the better.